Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Wellness Talk. I am George Batista, as always, your host and your wellness advocate. So glad you guys could join me each week. Today, we have a very, very special show. We're actually going to be doing a little bit of a continuation on a show I did about a month ago called Music as Medicine. I talked about some studies regarding how music was used to help people post heart attack, people with cognitive decline, all different types of things. Very, very powerful show. If you guys didn't get a chance to check that out, make sure you do. It was some really, really compelling studies on there. But today we're going to be doing an even deeper dive today because we have a very special guest, and we have Kathleen Howland on today. And we're going to be talking about talking to Kathleen about music therapy and how music heals and the power of music. This is something, of course, you guys know near and dear to my heart because I've been a musician for well over 30 years. And this is just something I love talking about. So let's talk a little bit about Kathleen. For the past 35 years, Kathleen has worked with a variety of clinical populations using music to enhance speech, language, cognition, and movement in habilitation and rehabilitation settings. She has also developed protocols to reduce stress, anxiety, for general wellness, surgical preparation, oncology treatments, and child birthing. Along with being a speech language pathologist, Kathleen teaches undergraduate and graduate courses at Berklee College of Music and the Boston Conservatory in Music Therapy, music education, and liberal arts. She also lectures locally and internationally about the neurological foundations for music perception and performance and the power of music as a therapeutic intervention. I am so excited to have this conversation with her today. So thank you so much, Kathleen, for being on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me and choosing such an exciting topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is, and again, those folks who listen to the show know that obviously this is a health show, but also know that I'm a musician. So when we put those two things together, it's like I could talk about it. I can talk about it all day. So this is going to be a fantastic conversation. So I was, and I know we were talking a little bit before the show, I was introduced to you by your TED Talk, which is fantastic. And those folks who haven't seen it, definitely go on YouTube, check out Kathleen's TED Talk, because it's really, really informative and very inspiring. It really shows the power of music. I want to talk a little bit about your background, first of all, for the folks that are not familiar with you. Talk about your journey in music and how it led you to what you are doing today.
40 years ago, the notion of music therapy was really quite unfamiliar. It was something that ended up being like an epiphany when I first heard the two words together. I had been a music education major. At the same time, I was working with children and young adults on the autism spectrum who were just coming out of institutions where they were physically and chemically restrained. Okay. And this was the advent of Skinner and all of the behaviorism. And in my work with them, their musicianship was unreal. It was so magnificent. And it captured me. And as a musician and as a aspiring music educator, I didn't know what to do with their musicality. I didn't know how to harness it for their well-being or for the goals that I was responsible for. And then one summer, in between my sophomore and junior year of college, I heard the words music therapy, and I just knew that's who I was, but I didn't have any idea what it was. And so I switched colleges, and I've been on this path ever since.
Wow. Incredible. So talk to us about music therapy specifically. What is it that you actually do? Because I know you work in oncology sometimes and hospice care and these types of things. So what are the actual mechanisms of it?
There are a number of interventions that we have at our disposal. It could include songwriting. It could be passive listening. It could be active engagement, where we offer instruments that need no specific skill, that are handheld percussive instruments, for example, that people can join in with their own musicality. We also do lyric analysis is another way of working with people, and improvisation. So we have these fundamental tools that we can use with people from womb to tomb, actually.
Wow.
They're very adaptable. We have the opportunity to serve 4 domains: speech and language, cognition, movement, and emotions. So, for example, walking into somebody's life in an oncology unit is a pretty uncomfortable few moments, I will say.
Sure.
You know, when you walk in and say, "Do you want to have music?" And people are like, "What? Do
Right.
you want me to sing?" And so, but once you do get your foot in the door, then they start to see, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about music. I
Yeah.
forgot about my love of music. Oh, I feel so supported. I feel so relaxed." So in oncology, for example, for people to reach the relaxation response, that biological state of rest and restoration, is really a great way to navigate all of the steroids and all of the chemotherapy that will go into their bodies. And I can say this not just as a practitioner, but as a patient myself, that when you're not in the stress response, that your body accepts Western medicine or any kind of intervention much more readily. And so for people to see that music can be used as a tool for resilience, it can be a way to occupy 8 hours of chemotherapy. When I was practicing before I was diagnosed, people were watching Jerry Springer in the oncology unit. I couldn't understand the overflow of toxicity, the choice of toxicity. And that taught me, when it became my time, I wanted to fill myself, my spirit, my body with love, joy, and laughter,
Right.
and aesthetic beauty. And I think it had a lot to do with the way my body received the medication, and the way that I was able to navigate. Those were precious hours. Those were really precious memories in my life, even though, yes, it made me sick and it made me bald and it did all the things it did.
Sure.
What I saw was I made wonderful use of that time. I didn't grade papers. I wasn't trolling on the internet just mindlessly. I was very much purposeful and in the beauty and power of music. And I think it made all the difference.
Absolutely. You know, it's this whole thing about healing, because even in the nutrition space, I've worked with people in the past who had cancer and who were just diagnosed, and obviously there's you talk about, yes, what you can do on the nutrition side, what you can do to help support the body when it's going through this, and support what they're going through as far as therapies and things like that. But it's amazing. The mindset has so much to do with it. And I didn't realize when I was doing that I was also had to be a therapist too, in a way. I had to help them with their outlook and their mindset, because when you don't have the right mindset, that affects the entire body, right? It's a mind-body connection. And now seeing music as part of this also, and it makes so much sense in terms of not only helping with recovery, helping when you're going through this. I mean, it really, really is this healing thing. And I think people, folks, again, the folks that I've worked with who have gone through this, they automatically kind of, they go into this apathy. Obviously there's this denial, there's this apathy, there's this whole thing. And then, then actually I'm sure and then you kind of come to terms with it and say, okay, what can I do now? What do I need to do to get past this? And it's, not only the talk therapy of it, that whole piece, but I didn't think about it as a musician back then when I was talking to these folks, of adding the musical piece to it. And now that I hear this, and what I saw from you, and I looked at a lot of the testimonials and things on that from your channels and stuff like that, it absolutely makes so much sense. how music can really help you in this process. It's incredible.
It's a distraction from the treatment and a focus on beauty.
Exactly. Absolutely. So, one of the stories that I told on the program that I did on music is my journey when I was a kid and how music helped me. So, and I'm an open book on my show. I'm pretty open about my when I was younger, and I'm a child of divorce, and my parents had a particularly nasty divorce when I was maybe about 8 years old or something like that. And so what I did is my bedroom was literally right next to my parents, and it was literally just a wall dividing us. And prior to the divorce, I would hear them arguing. It was almost every other night. So as a child, like 6 or 7 years old, obviously that creates a lot of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do during that time, I had a little radio next to me, and I would put on the radio. And it did two things for me. It drowned out my parents arguing, obviously, but it also took me away. It brought me into another world of music, and it calmed me. It calmed my anxiety. And it actually helped me go to sleep. And I started using that nightly to help me go to sleep. And to the point where even after my parents' divorce and my mom and I were living alone, I couldn't go to bed without music.
Mm-hmm.
It just became a part of me.
Mm-hmm.
Have you in your practice heard things like that, especially with children, developing children young, dealing with, let's say, post-traumatic disorder or things like that, where music has helped them?
Very commonly. And you found that circumstantially you happen to have a radio.
Right.
Versus as a music therapist, we're making sure that with intention, with clinical practice, that these are with a child, that they say, for example, working with a set of parents who are awaiting a baby, or the baby arrives too early.
Right.
Okay, let's create your own lullaby. What do you want to say to your child? And then incorporate that into song, and that calms both the mother and the child.
Mm-hmm.
And that bonding continues in a more normal way. So
Right.
it is always helping people find, where does music meet you in this moment?
Right. Exactly.
And then what comes next? What's the next piece? And then the piece after that, so that you can move in the direction that is all about well-being and survival, or thriving, even if you're dying.
Right. Exactly.
I have seen music fill the void, that empty void, as you wait for people to take their last breath, to fill it with beauty, to soften people's faces, to lower people's shoulders, and to fill that empty void, and to see it regulate the breathing of the person who's actively dying. So it is incredibly salient to our brains, whether we are premature or fetal, or
Right.
at the end of our lives. And I think it's a tremendous gift that is not considered more strongly enough in education or in medicine.
Agreed. It's interesting, when when my wife was pregnant, of course, as a musician, you're like, okay, I'm hoping this, hoping my child is, comes out with the love of music. And of course, I was one of those that took the headphones and put it on her belly and played music and stuff like that. And now I did read some books back then. The Mozart Effect was one of them that I read, and some others. But I always wondered if that did make a difference. Because now my just so you know, that now my daughter's 16, she does love music, and I think a lot of it is because she saw her dad playing and her dad loving it, and she got into it. And she actually, I even she did a project for school, and she had to draw, I forget what the project was called, but her drawing was of a snowman. It was very interesting. Her drawing was of a snowman with headphones on. And there was all this stuff around the snowman, crazy things happening, but the snowman was just there with a smile and headphones. So I went up to her and I said, what does this mean? What is the significance? She says, Dad, this is me when I'm listening to music and drowning out the world, because music is just taking me away to another place. And I was blown away.
Yes.
I was shocked at how she was so, how she thought of it. Because I never realized, and again, I knew she loved music, but I never realized that she thought of it in that way.
Yes.
And you're surprised at how children growing up, whether their parents are musicians or not, or whether they love music or not, how music, especially because now there's music everywhere, on social media and everything, it does inspire children, right?
Yes.
Growing up.
Yes. When my daughter was 4, we had a car accident, just a sliding winter accident, but it was very unnerving. I had a child in the car, and she said, "Mama, just listen to the music. Just
look at that.
Listen
Look at that.
Which is wonderful.
It's incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into so you have one of the things that I have found that's very interesting to me is music, how it affects people who are going through cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's. Now, I've seen it, and I'm not a neuroscientist or anything like that, so I don't know all the mechanisms to this, but I've always been interested in that whole piece of how a person who's going through that cannot recognize a loved one, but will know every lyric to the song, or will know, or even the musicians know how to play the song. Examples like Glenn Campbell, who went through that. Couldn't recognize his own kids, but yet he would be on stage playing the song perfectly.
With his children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tony Bennett is going through that now. Do you know, or can you explain a little bit about the brain and the mechanism and how that works?
Well, that's a very big topic. So let's take a look at your average person, for example, a non-musician. And then we'll talk about how perhaps being a musician can be neuroprotective to cognitive decline.
Absolutely.
So for people, especially those that in Vivek Murthy's brilliant book called Together showed us the cost of social isolation in terms of cognition. So just living alone increases our risk for dementia by 40%.
Wow.
And it's a lack of stimulation. It's a lack of cognitive engagement. So you think about, say, elders doing find a word versus actually doing a crossword puzzle. The cognitive demands are vastly different. And one of the best things that you can do is listen to music, but not just music but really going through the CDs or LPs or whatever you have, or technology if you feel comfortable, in exploring music. Like if you can take a favorite song and put it into Pandora, now you're going to let the algorithm give you the breadth of that. So it's having an adventurous spirit a little bit, or having an adventurous spirit that's encouraged. But listening to music alone can be cognitively stimulating. And in some very interesting studies from Finland showing that after a stroke, people did better when they were and had better recoveries when they were listening to music daily. And I think, and there's nothing in science to say this is true, but across science and across my experience, I think that what music does in its orderedness is help order brain function. So rhythm being very, very fundamental, patterns that are redundant and that vary, but they're recognizable. This is so different. And then, of course, there's the emotional salience of it, which can give you jolts of joy that can motivate you and have you engaged. So I think listening to music for non-musicians is really important in cognitive decline and should be considered as a daily dosing.
Yeah.
like especially at times when they might be inclined to nap, because cognitive decline is, you also see people napping because they're bored. They're
Right.
not engaged.
Right.
So when they're napping several times a day, those are the times a day that music should be put on. And it should avoid the naps. Now, naps are very, very healthy, but not frequent napping, and particularly due to boredom.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can look at Glenn and Tony. And I met with Glenn's family when they came to town to debut the movie,
Mm-hmm.
I'll Be Me,
Mm-hmm.
with NIH researchers in Boston. And it's amazing to me what the researchers miss. They'll keep saying, well, he's still playing because he's talented. And I'm saying, oh, Lord, no. Yeah, he's still playing because he has thick neural networks that were developed over years
Mm-hmm.
and decades of playing. And when Alzheimer's came a calling, it's like chipping away at marble. And Glenn was symptomatic for a decade before he was diagnosed. So I remember talking with his daughter. He started being symptomatic when she was 16, 17. She was 27 when he was diagnosed, and continued to persist at mid-stage Alzheimer's for over a year. So what I think we can say is that being a musician and actually being a college professor is neuroprotective. We have thick neural circuits that are practiced over every semester. We get to practice what we
Right.
know again and
Right.
to extend it. And so you're looking at neuroprotectiveness. You can look at the opposite of neuro unprotectiveness in the high incidence of Alzheimer's in people with Down syndrome.
Okay.
So that genetic deletion syndrome has a high incidence of like 74% of them will get Alzheimer's, and they start in their 30s and 40s. And it moves through them in a matter of weeks and months, what it takes months and years for neurotypical people, and what appears to be even a slower burn for musicians.
Wow.
This was my hypothesis with Glenn. And then when Tony came out, it was like, okay, now we're on to something.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
think we're on to something. And when I looked at other research about occupational incidences of Alzheimer's, those like professors have low incidence, again, because I think of the thick neural networks, and it just takes longer for the Alzheimer's pathology to chip away at it.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. See, that's an interesting take on that. Because
And here's
now,
another,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Okay.
Here's another point, that there are lots of studies that show training adults to play piano,
And I was going
for
to ask you about that.
example,
Yeah.
increased brain matter. So we
Mhm.
can see density given to that training.
Right.
But like any of us who've tried to, especially piano, to learn as an adult, it's just a gosh darn difficult thing to
Yeah.
do.
Yes. Very true.
Very true, because the developmental window that makes that easier has closed to make it easier to do two different things with two hands, to have that type of coordination going on. That window has closed. So, what I think would be much more sustainable is actually to teach children K to 12 fundamental piano skills that they can use for their life, rather than trying to train elders, or for elders to train in music, not to choose such a difficult instrument, but
Okay.
then to go to ukulele.
Oh,
Ukulele is very easy to play. And as you know, you learn 3 chords, 500 songs. You
right.
learn 4
Exactly.
chords, 1,500 songs.
Very true. Very
And
true.
and you see that now in senior centers, lots and lots of opportunities to learn and play the instrument. And it also puts them not only in a cognitively engaging task, but a socially rewarding experience in community.
Absolutely. Well, and that's, it makes sense also, because you're right, because when you're, whether it's you're in a band or whether you're in an orchestra or whatever it is, you're learning to work with the rest of the group. You're
Mm-hmm.
learning to or you're leading. You're learning to lead. You're learning to become a leader of that orchestra or that band or whatever it is. And that's actually igniting another part of you, as far as, oh, okay, now that whether it's the confidence part or whatever it is, yeah, now I can actually lead a band, and that type of thing, because it makes so much sense. One thing I wanted to ask you was, so if you're teaching, let's say we're teaching K through 12 piano, or that type of thing, have they done really long-term studies on, if they've taken it up at that point and then looked at them when they got older, to see if there's a difference, or is there less cognitive decline because they learned it at that time?
But those type of longitudinal studies really can't be done.
Okay.
They're just too expensive. The
Okay.
attrition is too much.
Right.
But there have been studies that look retrospectively, and part of that is trying to estimate how many hours you practice, like George, how many hours if you played music. It would be very, very difficult because it waxes and wanes through life,
That's
as
true.
we know.
Right.
And how much people practice and how truthful they're being about what they practice. These are difficult. So
Very
there are
true.
a lot of studies that look at musicians versus non-musicians. And now, because of a certain type of neuroimaging equipment, we can see the difference between singers and instrumentalists. One of the series of studies that I love shows that people who age with hearing loss also have an increased risk of dementia by 40% just because of hearing loss. Again, a lack of stimulation to the brain.
Sure.
But for those who, if you and I had equal hearing loss profiles, but one was a musician and one wasn't, the musician is going to hear a signal in noise better than a non-musician. In other words, being able to make better use of the hearing that they have because of their music training, even if they haven't played since high school.
Wow.
Because they learned to play music at a very formative age in brain development, they have these long-lasting benefits. And this is the brilliant work of Nina Kraus at Northwestern University. I find that stunning.
That is unbelievable. Wow, I didn't know that. That's incredible.
And now Frank Russo has been looking at training people who are non-musicians in music so that they gain that benefit, and seeing that they are able to gain that benefit. So they're training in singing and ear training type exercise like you would have at a College of Music, and finding that's improving their ability, because as soon as they start to have a hearing disorder, it makes going out into social gatherings very difficult. They can't hear. Their hearing aids only make that worse. So they tend to socially isolate. And remember, I also said that social isolation increases the risk for dementia. Hearing loss increases the risk for dementia. So music training actually is benefiting people in the long run. And I just love, love, love that work.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. Yeah, these are the insights that I find fascinating as well. I heard you talk about, which I found fascinating also, children with dyslexia.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is also Nina's work.
Okay.
And others. You have to be able to process sound normally. And for children who at 3 years of age will say there are patterns of music, dee, 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 dee. If a 3-year-old says those are the same, instead of saying they're different, and their score is low, the risk of them being dyslexic increases. The lower their score, the higher the risk for dyslexia, showing that we have to be musical before we are linguistic and before we are literate. So there's a biomarker now. We can look at a screening, a simple screening of 3-year-olds, and start to look at what their capacity will be for learning to read, because we know that, say, 40% of people incarcerated are dyslexic and 90% are illiterate.
Right.
That by not being able to read because of conventional school systems, they don't have access to the kingdom of knowledge and inspiration.
Right. Exactly.
And so we are not yet to the place to say what would remediate that finding, because this is all relatively new, but assuredly it will be to put them into an early childhood music class.
Right.
Absolutely.
Wow. Incredible.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Oh, here's another one I think you'll really like.
Absolutely.
The work of Kathleen in Germany has been collecting children's vocalizations, their cooings at 2 to 4 months of age. And they are actually, music students will take dictation, because children vocalize in noticeable musical intervals. And furthermore, what she's shown is that if the children do not have a nice variety of vocalizations that they're capable of doing, it demonstrates what they're perceiving is not typical.
Oh.
And so by looking at the vocalizations of children at 2 to 4 months of age, you can predict those that will have a language delay at age 2. Because they're not, in this way, they're demonstrating to us what they're perceiving, what they're hearing, and they're demonstrating to us that it's constrained.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Beautiful work.
That's unbelievable. I love the fact that they're actually even doing this. They're seeing this and doing this work, because it's wow.
I have a happy research dance that I do, and I did that for days after reading both of these series of studies. Yes.
Wow. It's interesting. For me, my mother used to tell me, because my father's side of the family was very musical. They all played some instruments at some point, whether it's piano or congas or whatever. And I had an uncle who was very, very good, gifted piano player, but he's got a very good ear for music. So my mother used to tell me that when I was a child, we had a washing machine in the kitchen, and it would go through this cycle, so it would make a rhythm. And I would walk over to it, and I would actually just stand there and just bob to the cycle of the washing machine.
Yeah.
And I used to do this constantly. And she said that she always said, he's going to do something in music. I just have this feeling that he's going to do something in music. And the funny thing is that she ended up putting me in piano lessons. I played piano probably for about a year, where I was starting to play with two hands. I was getting good, but as a kid, you kind of get bored with it sometimes, and it's like, okay, whatever. And I stopped, but then I ended up picking up the drums later on. But what I found for me was that music was easy. It was very easy for me to pick up, to learn, and I found that, and there was a lot of jokes in the bands and when we played, that for me, when I was able to have this pitch, like I knew the notes, I knew the pitch, I knew the songs, and it's one of those things, I could hear the song once and I would know it. And and I'm like, I can't remember to take out the garbage, but I can remember the song perfectly, and I always said to myself, there had to be through my father's side, because my uncle is that way and I'm that way, but some of the musicians I played with will marvel at that, because they didn't have that, even if they're actually bass players or guitar players, but the drummer, for whatever reason, knew the pitch and knew the notes and knew the songs.
Right.
It's just one of those interesting things, how you have this gift, and it seems to be heightened. That for me, I felt that it was very heightened even as a kid. Now all I had to do was kind of develop it as I got older.
Yeah, I think talent is actually a myth. I really do. I think, like any other human trait, it's normally distributed. There are those with above average aptitude,
Right.
capacity, average, below average. And you sound like you were very much above average, but that has to also be matched to opportunity. You
Exactly.
had your uncle as a model.
Yes. Yes.
Perhaps you were going to live music.
Hmm.
You had access to instruments,
Right.
lessons.
Right.
That's nurtures contribution. But then there's that other piece that's grit. You didn't
Yeah.
have the grit for piano.
Right.
And we also kind of make it a chore. I think music educators should really teach how to practice.
Hmm.
I think the Suzuki method is just right, because if your child is going to do this challenging task, you should too.
Right.
So I studied violin when my daughter chose it, and it was hard,
Yeah.
but I did it so that we played together. We did duets. I played her something, she played me something. And that's really important. It's an opportunity to teach grit. It's an
Yes.
opportunity to tell people to incentivize it, to use your own music for relaxation. Like, play me something you love. It's hard to do the woodshedding. It's hard to
Mhm.
go over and over that same passage.
Right.
So making sure that you play music you love. And in fact, there was a elegant study from a German conservatory of music looking at 3 tiers of violinists, the very
Mhm.
best, the next best, and then the third group. And what they found was the top two groups played informally, which meant they jammed or they played the things that they loved. They
Mhm.
did that more than the third group.
Right.
So it's important to keep the love there. It's important to have a teacher who cares for the child, who cares for the music, who's
Yes.
not just phoning it in. And I deeply, deeply resent movies like Coda and Whiplash that show
Oh yeah.
music education as a brutalist and brutal profession. I don't
Mhm.
think it's that at all. I was
I agree.
very much cared for by my music teacher, and I
Mhm.
had everything to do with fueling my grit and maximizing my aptitude and giving me every opportunity to be a musician 50 years later.
Absolutely. It's funny. You know, we talked a little bit. You mentioned jamming, for example,
Hmm.
and I was the type of person that when I started playing, I just jammed,
Hmm.
and again, it was very natural for me, but I didn't learn how to actually read music until later.
Hmm.
So, and you know, I remember my uncle telling me, he was like, sometimes he goes, there are people that are perfect readers, but they don't know how to jam.
Absolutely.
And I was like, and I was young when I was a teenager when he told me this, and I was like, really? He was like, believe me, because he played with a lot of different people, and he said there are people who, can play. They need a chart in front of them in order to play,
Hmm.
and it's very kind of stiff type thing versus a person who's just can jam, because there's a feeling when you jam whatever instrument it is that is like no other,
Hmm.
especially when you click with all the other members of the group and there's just push and pull, and then there's, because again, music is communication. You're communicating with each other, and you know where that person's going, and you know when to lay back, and you know when to come on. I mean, it's a beautiful communication. It's almost
Yeah,
I find it's a spiritual communication. There's this, you're all together, and you kind of get to this higher level of being, because to me, when I'm playing, and I'm sure you felt this when you're playing, it's almost an out of body experience. You
absolutely.
find that you're, especially when you could even be practicing, but when it's almost like you close your eyes and you're almost like watching yourself, and you're like, and then it's funny because you get to a level sometimes that you've never gone to before, and you're like, holy cow, where was I?
Yeah.
But it's
It's
a beautiful
absolutely
thing.
marvelous. In the work of Charles Limb, who's a neuroscientist and surgeon, has shown, and wonderful piano player, has shown that when people are in that state, it's like Csikszentmihalyi's flow,
Yeah.
that self-expression, areas in the brain related to self-expression are enhanced, and areas of the brain related to self-criticism, that negative voice,
Mm,
are attenuated.
look at that.
Isn't that lovely?
That's unbelievable.
And that was done with people laying on their backs, making music in a scanner.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Charles Lim has a wonderful TED Talk on this topic.
Oh, I definitely will check that out. And you've talked about also how music lights up the whole brain, right?
Music is very engaging for the entire brain. Absolutely activates subcortical, cortical areas, both the left and right hemisphere. It's very, very complicated. And what I think music does so beautifully is it braids together different functions.
Yeah.
So if you decode music notation, you're taking a visual representation of sound for
Right.
time and pitch, and it's creating motor patterns. So then that visual is connected and braided with the motor system, which is then braided into the auditory system. You're predicting what that pitch is going to sound like, and you're assessing what that pitch did sound like. Was that a little flat? Was it a little sharp? Then your executive functions kick in like, oh my God, here comes that high D. Is my reed going to hold this? I better pull up on this. And then sometimes you reflect, which is never good, because sometimes you're like, was that supposed to be an F sharp? And then you start making mistakes in the now because you're looking back. So it really does involve so many areas. And it's not that they're separate islands, but that they're braided together with really thick circuits to allow this work to flow as easily as it does.
Wow. Absolutely. Do you find in your work, and I guess it depends on the person, but do you find that, is there any specific type of music that is more or that works better than others, or is it just a personal thing depending on what stimulates the person?
Absolutely. There's no perfect song, which is why music therapists have music degrees as well as psychology degrees and 1,200 hours of clinical training. It takes a long time to nurture an aspiring music therapist into a professional music therapist. I remember going into an oncology room one time, and there were three people. One man loved Elvis Presley, another guy liked Bach. And it's like, okay, where are we going with this?
Right.
And there needs to be tremendous versatility in a music therapist in order to be able to use people's preferences for their well-being in that moment. Or sometimes it would be bringing in something that's novel, that's unfamiliar to them for a specific clinical purpose as well. So it requires deep training, and there's no one genre of music or one artist or one song that meets the needs for everybody. And so we have to be very flexible and in the moment with deep training in order to be able to meet these people's needs.
Okay. Have you ever, and I've seen it I guess I've seen it in movies, I've heard of, things like this, but is it true that people who are in comas can be stimulated by music?
Oh, that's such an important question. I wanted to do my master's work in coma, and my professors wisely said, no, because it's such a vulnerable population.
Okay. Right.
I would offer to you and to your listeners a beautiful film that was done at Spalding Hospital by my colleague, Brian Harris. And what he did was a traditional sensory stimulation program has you clapping, yelling somebody's name, trying to get them to orient to you. So a therapist is doing it on one side of the bed, and then Brian is on the other side and replicates that same protocol. And they see no reaction from this young man who had an anoxic event following a drug overdose.
Oh, wow.
Brian starts to create a simple pattern in music. It could have been something as simple as loo, 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 loo. And then he would have done what's called an expectancy violation. He interrupted the pattern in an awkward place. Loo, 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 loo. And
Okay.
it's very compelling to want to finish that. And
Right.
what they witnessed was a full body turn toward Brian and a vocalization in the timing of the missing element.
No way.
Yes, way.
Wow.
So I've always found the traditional and conventional sensory stimulation program to be noxious. Honestly, people are pinched for a response.
Right.
People are
Sure.
startled for a
Sure.
response. And
Right.
I think that we can do better than that. So our brain is a pattern perceiving organ. And when we give them a pattern and we interrupt it, then we can see what's possible. So not all people in comas can do this, but as we assess them along their path, we can identify using music the potential for further treatment. That young man had been diagnosed as vegetative at that time,
Mhm.
meaning
Mhm.
just brainstem level functioning.
Right.
But when they saw that type of reaction, now he merited more rehabilitative services, as he should.
Wow. That is unbelievable.
So until there's a music therapist assessment that's done properly and over time,
Mhm.
because it's a very, very vulnerable population. I
Sure.
mean, their brain is shut itself down, or they are medically put into comas to
Right.
save their brains. And so having music is, if you're going to diagnose somebody as vegetative, it requires, it merits a music therapy assessment before that is done, and services are rendered to be just, custodial in a nursing home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. So, Kathleen, this has been absolutely enlightening for me. I mean, I know I just kind of scratched the surface when I when I did the show Music is Medicine, but some of the the things that you talked about today have just been absolutely incredible.
Isn't it
And
startling
it
and
is.
exciting?
It is. It's very exciting to me, and it's just, and it's not just because I'm a musician. I mean, I'm just a lover of music in general, even if I'm just passively listening. And music touches everyone. I mean, everybody
Mhm.
has heard music, whether they just, again, passively or actively listening. But, I think people need to understand how powerful music really is, and really what it can do. And you know, folks like yourself and programs like this hopefully can at least get the word out and say, listen, this is something that no matter what you're going through, it doesn't have to be.
No matter what.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be something you were diagnosed with. It could just be, you could just be going through a bad time, in your life. But use music to lift you up, to help you through
Mhm.
that time. Because I mean, again, I'm a person, you see it daily, and I'm a person who went through it as a child, that music can be a healing thing. So I definitely encourage everyone to really explore music, and even playing an instrument,
Mhm.
learning an instrument. Again, the motor skills involved and things like that as well is very, very beneficial. And I definitely want everybody to not only check out your TED Talk, which is on YouTube, but also to go to your website, KathleenHowland.com, to check out the services that you offer. And you write a great blog. You have some great blogs on there, by the way. So I
Thank you.
definitely encourage everyone to check those out, read those, and just think about music for healing, because it is absolutely healing. And Kathleen, I really want to thank you so much. It's been an honor for you, to have you on this show. And thank you so much for being on, and really enlightening me and my audience.
Thank you. It's a privilege to have been asked and to be able to share what I know and what I love and what I love to know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I will be right back. All right, guys. So that was Kathleen Howland. I hope you really got a lot out of that, because just incredible information that she offers. And again, just check out her site, check out her TED Talk, and again, explore music, and the power of music. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you guys take care of yourselves. Make sure you guys take care of each other. And don't forget, as always, control your health. Have a great day.